I'm gonna walk you through every step of painting a snowy winter tree with gouache and simplify what looks like a fairly complicated subject, but it's actually easier than it looks. Let's start by gathering our materials. I'm using gouache paint. For this particular piece, I'm using Holbein's primary, cyan, yellow, and magenta, and Winsor & Newton's white gouache, and I have them in this little travel palette, and I'm using the Etcher ceramic plate to mix them. I'm also using 2 cups of water to keep my brushes extra clean, my Princeton Velvetouch brushes, which I adore for gouache, and then also my towel to wipe my brushes, my toned grey mixed media journal from Strathmore, which if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I absolutely love using toned paper for gouache. I want some crisp borders for this one, so I'm laying down my washi tape for that satisfying tape peel reveal at the end, but you don't need to tape off. I also like a painterly edge done by freehand, so it's up to you and the look you want to give it. And I'm also linking the Pinterest reference I used for this in the description so you can follow along. So starting with the sky, I'm mixing a vibrant light blue by using cyan and a touch of yellow and white, and my paint consistency is on the thinner side, so making sure it stays wet but not like soaking on the page. I'm going in with a slightly lighter blue as well, so I add more white to create a gradient effect in the sky, so it goes from dark to light as you go down the page, and this helps with giving depth and perspective that the horizon is further away. While the paint of the sky is still wet, I'm going in with a white gouache mixed with a little bit of water, so it's still got that watery consistency, and lightly dabbing it across the sky diagonally to create some streaky clouds. You can see because it's wet paint on wet paint that it blooms a little bit, and this helps create the fluffiness of the clouds. And we're going to come back to the sky and these clouds too, but I want them to dry a bit first before I build on top of them to create depth and even more kind of fluffiness. So I'm moving on to the horizon line, which is the furthest away point of trees and hills in that reference picture, and I'm mixing a dark blue, and this is more parts cyan and magenta with smaller parts or like a touch of yellow and white, and this desaturated tone will help make appear that horizon line further back, because in landscapes the further things are away, the more blue tone they are. Now I'm laying down a thin wash of white as the snow, and I'm just blocking this out on the page, but I will be going over this with a few different layers. So I'm going back to the sky, which is dry now, and I want to add some more depth and textures, so I'm layering in some more streaky clouds with a very light touch and very watery white blue paint. Now I'm going in with some thicker white paint, so not much water mixed in with the paint, and I start to build out some of the cloud edges, which helps add to the dimension of the clouds, so they start looking a bit more three-dimensional. I love using this technique for clouds. I think they look really cool. Now I'm beginning to build my tree, so I'm going to start by mixing a dark green, and for this I'm using cyan and yellow mainly, but to darken it I'm adding a touch of magenta. So play around with this mixture, see what works for you, but essentially you want to end up with a dark-ish green. Don't stress too much about getting the perfect colours. As long as you follow the general values, like how light and how dark a colour is, it's okay if your green doesn't look exactly the same as my green. I then begin building the branches, loosely following my reference, and I'm keeping my brush relatively dry. You can see it's not creating big paint marks because I'm using it with a light hand, but also the brush itself is not soaking wet, and this allows for control and also texture. I get a lot of questions about how do you paint on top of layers of gouache and not disturb the paint underneath it, and honestly, water control and also a light hand is really helpful for this. You can see how dry my brush is by the marks it's leaving on the page. So really make sure that your brush is nice and dry, and that's why I have a towel at hand, because it really helps soak up the excess water when I'm painting. As I'm waiting for my tree branches to dry, I'm just going to move on to the trees in the background that you see right in the horizon. So I'm mixing up a bluey green. So grabbing some of that green I already have, mixing a bit more cyan into it to really push these trees back into the horizon. Then by adding more cyan to my dark green mixture, I'm making it even darker with this colour, and I go in and I build my tree out more. And by having different tones of green, I can start to create depth and dimension to my tree branches, so they're not all just the one flat green colour. And you'll see that we're going to build this up even more, but I always get asked how to create that dimension and depth in my illustrations, and it really is just creating a range of values that helps push that contrast up so that you can show that the light is hitting an object and creating depth and dimension, and I really like painting like that. Okay, so now I'm mixing up colours for the snow, and I'm gonna start by laying down the darker shades of snow. So I'm going from the shadows to the lighter snow in layers, and I mixed up this dark blue. Don't be scared to go dark with this snow. That's the only way the white snow will appear super bright. And I actually end up going even darker than this for the shadows, but for now we start with this dark blue grey, which I mix up really using all the colors. You're going to want more parts cyan, but you really want to put in that magenta so it kind of creates that desaturated tone. Play around with it. Essentially you want to end up with this dark grey blue. And I'm placing it on the branches of the tree in these larger strokes. I'm also using that same colour with a bit more water mixed in and using a very light touch for the shadows on the ground. Using a really light hand when painting over gouache is great to not disturb the paint underneath and not reactivate it, but also it's okay if the paint does get a bit reactivated. Sometimes it works in your favour because here it's lightening those shadows a little bit, which is what I want. Okay, so now I'm adding white to that dark blue-grey that I mixed to lighten it slightly, which is going to be my second layer of snow on the tree. I'm placing that lighter grey on top of the dark blue-grey and adding some shapes and kind of textures to show that it's kind of snow on the branches, on the different separate little branches of the tree. Now remember that gouache color shifts, so the lighter a color is, it dries darker, and dark colors dry lighter. So this white that I'm putting down, or kind of this like light blue gray that I'm putting down, looks kind of light right now, but it actually dries a lot darker. And this is good, this works in our favor because we want to keep everything pretty dark so that that bright white snow that we're going to lay on top at the end looks super bright white. I'm now mixing a more blue toned grey, and this bluish tinge will add a kind of cooler tone to the snow. I'm placing this on top of the branches and areas where I'm seeing more shadow in my reference photo. I'm also using this colour for the shadow underneath the tree as well. Okay, I would suggest you wait for this darker layer to dry really well, as in this next step I will begin to layer in the lighter snow. And to lay lighter gouache on dark gouache, you want to make sure that the lighter gouache is a bit thicker and you don't have as much water on your brush. And remember to use a light hand when making those strokes on the page. And I'm being more detailed with my brush strokes, making the marks smaller so it looks like the snow is on each separate branch. And you can see that this isn't bright white, it's drying a bit darker, but this is laying kind of a mid-tone of white so I can then layer my brighter white on top. It's all in the layering process with gouache. I think here you can see the perfect example of the paint underneath reactivating as I'm putting down this white, and it's okay that that happens. There's multiple layers that will go on top of these, so it's okay that some of that paint gets reactivated and mutes the color a little bit. That's why I do so much layering, and it just really adds and enhances the depth. At this stage you can see that I'm going back and forth with the white, but then also adding in some darker bits and kind of blending between the colours. And this is what starts to happen at this stage, because I'm realising I need to darken some areas or lighten some areas, and that's what I call the dance with gouache. You kind of go back and forth until you hit the perfect mark. I'm going in with this dark green to pick out some of those branches because I realised I needed more depth to the branches and the leaves. I'm using really small marks to create those branches and leaves, and making sure my brush is also quite dry so that it has that texture. And I'm actually realizing I think I used the same brush for the whole illustration. I'm not sure, but I think it is the same brush, and that happens to me often. I kind of get so lost in the process that I don't switch up my brush, which kind of shows the versatility of these Princeton Velvetouch brushes, because they're just so good. Like, you can create really different marks depending on how wet or dry the brush is and how light you go in. So I really love these brushes. Just make sure that you are really rinsing and cleaning between colors. That's why I have 2 waters, because it really helps with that, and that will help with not muddying essentially the colors when you're using the same brush for the whole thing. Now I'm going in with an even brighter white, and I'm really picking out those highlights that I'm seeing in my reference photo. I'm blending out those streaks in the foreground with a bit of water on my brush and just reactivating the paint that's already on the page. And now I'm going back in and picking out even more highlights with the snow, and I'm going to do this a few times. As I already mentioned, the gouache colour shifts when it dries, so the layering process is really important here to build out that snow and make it look really dimensional. Playing with the thickness of the strokes is really going to be helpful too in creating dimension and different textures on the snow. So some highlights are a lot thinner and some a bit thicker, and that will really help create those finer details. Those background trees need a bit of snow too, so I'm just dabbing on tiny little strokes for the snow on those background trees. At this point, I'm going in with lighter and darker gouache depending on what I'm seeing, kind of fine-tuning, seeing what's dried a bit too light or a bit too dark, adding some more of those tiny details like the twigs poking out of the tree. This is the part in the illustration where I feel like there's no clear-cut step-by-step, because it is really adjusting to what you're seeing and how things are developing and drying, and observing if you need more shadow or more highlight. I think my biggest takeaway for this part in the process is to really tune in to your intuition and analysis of your reference or what you're trying to achieve, and figuring out what it is that you need at this point. Once everything is nice and dry, I go in with a thicker white paint to pick out those really crisp, bright highlights on the snow, which I feel makes everything stand out a lot more. Now everyone's favorite part, which is the tape peel reveal, which I feel like is so satisfying. But even at this stage, as I'm peeling the tape, I'm like, okay, I'm seeing a few areas I want to just touch up. So I'm going back in, blending out a little bit between the paint, adding a few more highlights. Okay, this is how it ended up turning out, and I would love to see if you followed along on what you created, so do let me know, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!